Hello, everyone. We're going to wait a few moments and give folks time to join us. Welcome, welcome. We're just giving people a chance to join on. Welcome, welcome. Okay, we are officially going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hawk Mountain Sanctuary's Stay at Home Speaker Series. Today's program is Solid Air Invisible Killer, Saving Billions of Birds from Windows, with Dr. Daniel Klem Jr., Professor of Biology and Sarcoscopian, Professor of Ornithology and Conservation Biology at Muhlenberg College. Welcome, Dr. Klem.
Well, thank you, Jane. And please permit me to share how much I appreciate and how grateful I am for the opportunity to speak with your members and guests about an important conservation issue for birds, raptors among them, and people.
Thank you so much. We're so glad you're joining us. And to all of our audience members, thank you so much for joining us. So my name is Jamie Dawson, and I am the Director of Education at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. As you may know, Hawk Mountain is the world's very first refuge for birds of prey. And we continue to work hard to be leaders in raptor conservation, science, and education, locally and globally around the world. Hawk Mountain is a private nonprofit, and membership is the lifeblood of our organization. To all of our members, thank you so very much, and muchas gracias for your continued support. And if you're joining us today and you're not a member, we hope that you consider becoming one in the future. Hawk Mountain hopes that everyone remains safe and healthy during these times of COVID challenges, and we are so excited to offer our local and global community a variety of free virtual programming. As always, Hawk Mountain greatly appreciates and depends on donations. Just so everyone is aware, today's program is being recorded. The video will then be accessible on Hawk Mountain's YouTube channel as a continued resource. We also have a link on our website directly connecting you to our YouTube channel. At any point during today's program, viewers may submit their questions through the Q&A feature on the Zoom platform, and we've designated some time at the end of the program to take some questions from the audience. And we are so excited that Dr. Daniel Klem is joining us today to share with us insights from his newest book, Solid Air Invisible Killer, Saving Billions of Birds from Windows. And before we go further, I'd like to take a moment to share some of Dr. Klem's background information with our audience. Dr. Daniel Klem Jr. is an American ornithologist known for his pioneering research into the mortality of birds due to glass windows. His research has influenced the design of buildings, including the Niagara Falls State Park Observation Tower, on which he was a design consultant. He holds several US patents relating to windows design. He has also written about the birds of Armenia. He is a Sarcoscopian Professor of Ornithology and Conservation Biology at Muhlenberg College, where he has been teaching since 1979. Dr. Klem obtained his Bachelor's of Science at Wilkes University and his Master's of Science at Hofstra University. He served in the US military during the Vietnam War and was awarded the Bronze Star Medal. He then earned his PhD in zoology in 1979, specializing in ornithology and ethology from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. He also received an honorary doctorate from Wilkes University, where he is also a trustee. So Dr. Klem, first of all, let me say thank you for your service in the US military. That is wonderful. And also thank you for being such a crusader for birds and ornithology. We certainly appreciate that at Hawk Mountain. So I have a few questions for you. So Dr. Klem, what inspired you to pursue a career in the field of ornithology and conservation biology?
Well, like everything in life, there's a life story behind that. But growing up in the country and with the fascination, affinity, and curiosity for life, other than, but including humans, is the start of it all, right? And when I came from Eastern a European immigrant family, and nobody went to college. So I was the first. And I think it's fair, as I described to my students, that I spent 4 years being frightened in college, not a good way to do it. But the point was is that I really didn't attract any mentors. And when I eventually had the opportunity to apply, I realized in biology I had to go to graduate school. So I had seen the ocean once, fell in love with it, decided I'd study fish behavior. Just by luck, I was able to get into a graduate program in Boston. And with not so good luck, that was the year that President Johnson cut all deferments for graduate studies, and I was subject to the draft. So when I returned from the military, I went back to Hofstra University, as you described, and there was somebody there, not the fish people, but the bird people, that found me acceptable. And I've been studying and caring for birds ever since.
And the rest is history.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing that. So would you mind telling us a little bit about your personal connection with Hawk Mountain Sanctuary?
Oh, sure. And again, I think I can spend a lot of time talking about this, but let me just point out a couple of things. In the 1980s, then Executive Director Stanley Center at the Sanctuary invited me to collaborate to help organize, analyze, and prepare for scientific publication the invaluable data that Hawk Mountain Sanctuary had compiled on birds of prey from its beginning. This was before laptop computers and the ability to store large amounts of information on them. Mr. Center realized that the mainframe computers at academic institutions like Muhlenberg College had an essential tool that Hawk Mountain didn't have. And together we agreed, planned, and with the help of so many talented others, principal among them, Dr. Jim Bednarz, then research director, and then staff specialist and now current Acopian director of conservation science, Dr. Goodrich, we successfully carried out this seminal work, combining and using our respective resources and tools in the very best spirit and practice of cooperation. Among other connections I have enjoyed with Hawk Mountain Sanctuary is first guiding and then convincing engineer, very successful businessman, and philanthropist, Sarkis Acopian, to invest in the future of the sanctuary. The result of that successful effort and investment is the current Acopian Center for Conservation Learning.
Wow, that is amazing. Thank you. I feel like I should be thanking you all day for everything you've done for Hawk Mountain. That is just a really fascinating history you have with Hawk Mountain, and what an impact, what an impact.
Well, I think if I might just add that it's really my honor and pleasure to be affiliated with such a prestigious place that has done so much good for so many, not the least of which, of course, are the birds that we all seek to protect. So it's really been an honor, and I continue to send students and others and anyone else that I feel will be enriched to the sanctuary for the opportunities that I enjoy.
Thank you so much. Much gratitude. Well, Dr. Klem, I think we are ready for your presentation. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, let me get my screen up here. Okay, let's see. Slideshow and beginning. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I have a number of slides. Some of them I think are picturesque and you'll find them of interest. So this is the book that has just recently come out. Here's a website that you can learn a little bit more about it regarding reviews. I've been grateful for the distinguished scientists and architects that have had the opportunity to read the book and provide some commentary and reviews, and they're available on the publisher's website. The publisher is Hancock House Publishing, and they're a wonderful group of people that believe in this cause and have done everything they possibly can to try to communicate the information that's needed for us to make the built environment we humans live in better for birds. So here's just a cast of characters that we're interested in protecting, and they're all organisms that are on sort of the dead list, as I point out, that have collided with windows. Typical backyards are attractive, picture windows in people's houses. The plain fact is that windows kill birds, and they do that because the birds don't see them as barriers. This is a display that's done every year in both the spring and the fall in Toronto by the Fatal Light Awareness Program that picks up dead birds down in the urban centers of Toronto and the surrounding suburbs. And they lay this out. National Geographic took a picture of this one year and used it as the promotion around the country. So what I'm going to tell you today, the claims I'm going to make, are based on 5 decades, really, going on almost half a century of me collecting records, analyzing them, publishing them in peer-reviewed scientific literature. And these are based on observations, some of which took place at individual homes for 1.5 to 2 years, continuous observations. Those people that were my cooperators lived in those homes and they worked in those homes, and they were able to document all kinds of what happened in terms of the birds interacting with their windows. And it was among that kind of data that I was able to ask questions about whether it mattered, whether windows were oriented in certain directions, what time of the day strikes occurred, what was the actual attrition rate per year in one particular structure, and so on. And then I did a whole series of experiments that further revealed the perceptive abilities of birds and then how to protect them from the glass itself. So here's the deal. As best we can tell from my earliest estimate, which was published in 1990, 100 million birds to 1 billion birds was the range in which that paper described the attrition occurring when birds fly into windows. If you take this very lowest figure of 100 million birds, you need 333 Exxon Valdezes every year. And as I point out many times, whenever I get the opportunity, it's been so difficult, to get our media to address this issue regarding the scale and the importance of it in terms of the health of our bird populations. Regularly you hear about climatic disasters or environmental disasters, and oil spills are what come to the forefront. And as I said, you need 333 Exxon Valdezes with this very low figure, but nobody's talking about windows. They're talking about oil spills. And again, we're not interested really in downplaying or making the causes of attrition of the birds that we care so much about a contest, saying that birds are more important or this and the other. They're all important. We have to solve all these problems together, but scale does matter. And my colleagues point out to me that another way of translating this is, if you take the conservative current figure, which was done from some sophisticated mathematical modeling, which is about 365 million to 1 billion birds every year, that works out to be about 1 billion birds dying a day. And it's not in the high image cities where reporters live and write about this that it's taking place. It's at our homes and our commercial buildings on a relentless year-round basis. So we have records, for example, about almost 12.5% of the 10,500 species of birds in the world that are known to fly into windows. This number is changing every day because we get more records from more people around the world. In North America, this works out to be about 30% of the birds in North America. This particular graph shows the relevance of other sources of mortality by humans. What's not listed here is cats, and cats, by some very important papers, have been described as the largest killers of birds in North America, domestic cats, free-ranging cats. But I write in my book, for example, that that's a bit much to think about this from a couple of points of view. We may not have the data yet, but you have to realize that the numbers attributed to cats are compromised. I've published papers, for example, describing experiments where we conducted to ask the question, who comes and collects the dead and dying underneath windows? And it turns out to be, it's not just dogs and cats, it's skunks and raccoons, and it's squirrels and chipmunks even. So the animals that are injured, the cats are taking, and these numbers are compromised in their own attrition rate attributable to cats. The other thing to think about is that cats are like all predators, they're after the weak. They're interested in those that are vulnerable, and they're going to take those first. But the windows, you'll hear me claim, are indiscriminate killers. They kill the fittest members of the population as well as unfit members. And this indiscriminate killing is very harmful to populations. The other thing too is think about the just sheer amount of surface area of glass. Again, they're not active predators, they're passive, and they're killing indiscriminately. And there are astronomically more windows in the world than there are cats. Again, we don't want to downplay. Cats are important. We have to control them. We have to keep them indoors if at all possible. But this scale of death attributable to sheet glass is really exponentially high, and it needs our attention. So why do birds fly into windows, and why don't we see them if these claims of numbers are so great being carried off in dump trucks? And the answer again is because animals consume them. And also remember, when an animal is hurt, even if it survives a collision, the way we make plantings around our windows, we put vegetation, and victims, if they're not killed outright, find their way to hide and out of the sight of human beings. So collisions we've learned from, again, tracking accounts around the world, they occur wherever birds and windows coexist. So why do birds collide? Why are there bird collisions occur? And the answer is birds behave literally as if windows are invisible to them. They attempt to reach, like here, these reflective windows, which illustrates the facing habitat and sky and mimics it. And they're unable to tell the difference between real vegetation and mirrored reflected vegetation. Here's another example here of a reflective window in this home. And I always like to point out, in this particular window, this is a perfectly clear window, but it acts like a perfect mirror as long as it's covering a darkened interior space. Now, most windows that are installed in human structures do just that. They cover darkened spaces and they act as mirrors. But there are other situations in which birds try to reach habitat on the other side of clear windows, like in corridors, which we refer to in the US, and the Canadians call them linkways. And they try to reach habitat and vegetation that's seen on the other side of these clear panes. This is a railing around a building. It's a killer. Birds sometimes see vegetation, like this time of the year when you place your Christmas tree or some other vegetation near a window during the holiday or other times. Birds attempt to get there, and you can see this bird was killed trying to reach this vegetation here. I'll say a little bit more about this later, but frankly, most birds die from striking windows for the same reason that we humans do when we have our head experience impacts, for example, in a car accident. If you're in a car accident and you're fortunate enough to have a helicopter come and take you to the nearby facility, they'll literally cut the top of your skull off so that your brain will swell, and then when it recedes, they'll suture you back up. And you've been a lucky person to be able to survive. Under most conditions, your brain swells and it breaks the blood-brain barrier, and it's curtains. And these animals experience this at the same time. Study at those homes, 50% of the animals died outright and 50% flew away, but we really have very little data on what kind of survivorship we get out of animals that fly away. This is another bird that's showing broken upper and lower mandible, and these are white-crowned sparrows, all of which are showing different levels of intracranial hemorrhaging. Again, you know, conservationists, and I remember Stanley Center, when he was at the sanctuary, always reminding us about Rose of the Edge, telling everyone that the time to save a species is when it's common, not when it's rare. And that's the same thing here. It's for all major conservation issues. And these deaths at window glass, again, are indiscriminate. I'll say a little bit more about that when I tell you about my very final chapter in the book. So the size of the window doesn't matter. It can be small, it can be large, it can be as big as a garage window, or it could be as large as the entire facade of a multi-story building. There's no season of the year or time of the day in which birds are immune to striking windows. Most people think about huge kills, which were reported in Philadelphia and New York City in the last few weeks. During migratory periods, 100 birds passed away flying into a skyscraper, mostly at ground level or where vegetation is located. And this is sort of an anomaly, right? I mean, what happens is that reporters live in cities. People discover birds on the sidewalk in cities, and they bring them to the attention of reporters, and they write about them. But most of the killing is taking place at people's homes and in small buildings, commercial buildings and residences. This group of researchers from the Smithsonian Institution, and now Scott Ross is the leader out of Oklahoma State University, published a paper documenting, for example, that 44% of that attrition of 1 billion birds that are dying annually in the United States alone occurs at homes and residences and low-story buildings, 1 to 3 stories. 56% were documented at buildings that were 4 stories to 11 stories, and less than 1% are dying at these skyscrapers. So the attrition rate is horrific. And again, I always like to point out that it doesn't ever surprise me. Just like when I travel the country and somebody tells me about a university or a college I hadn't heard of, I shouldn't be surprised because that we have so many, and we're so gifted to have so many educational institutions. But likewise, I run across architects all the time that have never heard of this issue about birds flying into windows, or homeowners who claim that they've never had a bird strike their window. And in every home that I've ever been at that people have claimed this, it just takes a little walk around to find evidence of a bird smudge or feathers in the window or a specimen underneath a picture window to convince them that, they just missed it. The bump that they experienced or the sound that was heard, as I write in the book, wasn't a ghost, it was a bird, smacking their window. So we talked about that. And feeders, of course, a study a number of years ago documented how the density of birds in front of windows by traction from feeders increases the density and increases the risk for these animals. So I had a paper years ago, a colleague wrote, and in the paper, the scientist said that, they've disproved Klem's density theory. And I said, gee, I didn't know I had one. But the bottom line is that they had correlated density of birds, which they had measured at about 100 meters from each of the sites that they were surveying. And this gave me an opportunity, to reply that when I talk about the density of birds in the immediate vicinity of a window, I'm talking about 10 meters, about 30 feet. This is the zone in which the animals are deceived. And this is where we need to be making our density measurements to correlate with what kind of killing is going on in terms of its number and what species are involved. So solutions, right? We've got what I have divided up into short and long-term solutions. Short-term solutions are retrofits for buildings and windows the world over that need to be protected, that birds need to be protected from them. And netting is a physical barrier that works, whether it's mosquito netting or whether it's hardware cloth or something. All patterns that are placed on windows, whether they're visible or in the case of ultraviolet signals, whether they're invisible, have to follow what's referred to as the 2x4 rule or the 2x2 rule. And what this means is that if you're using dots or lines or anything, and you're going to orient these elements of a pattern that uniformly cover the window, they have to be separated by 2 inches horizontally or by 4 inches vertical rows. Then, people are always curious, they want to know, why the 2 inches horizontally and the 4 inches vertically. And I don't know, here's the deal. The birds who are experiencing these things and teaching us about how they behave around these things are not talking. And like so many other things, they have no voice. So we have to interpret the best we can by knowing what we know about their visual systems, right? Our physiologists, our aviophysiologists help us learn that. And we also learn from their behavior. And, my interpretation is watching birds in the wild all my life is that they tend to give a little bit more space around tree trunks than they do branches, skimming in and between. So the 2 inches on the horizontal level, a tighter squeeze saves more lives than if it was 4 inches. And 4 inches vertical reduces the risk of a strike by about 95 to 100%. But lately, some guidelines produced by Canadians and others and published works by the American Birding Conservancy, the City of Toronto and Calgary and so on, they've been advocating the 2x2 rule in an attempt to be more inclusive, protecting smaller kinglets and hummingbirds from striking. And the lesser spacing is appropriate as long as people find it acceptable. Architects number windows from surface number 1, the pane that faces the outside. The other side of that pane is surface number 2, and then if there's another pane, like in an insulating unit, there's 3 and 4, and if there's another pane, it's 5 and 6, and so on. And the deal is that, remember that reflective window that was perfectly clear? If you're going to apply elements to any surface other than number 1 on the outside, it has the potential of being hidden by that reflection. And so it's very important when you're dealing with a reflective window to make sure that the patterning you use to protect a bird is placed on the outside. Now, of course, in corridors, linkways, and atria, and other places where you have see-through effects, it really doesn't matter what surface you place your protective patterning on, as long as humans and birds can see it from the outside. And that will alert them to the fact that this is a barrier they should avoid. This is Acopian bird savers. Jeff Acopian was on the Mountain board for many, many years. And his father was the one, again, who invested in sanctuary. And he's come up with this low-cost series of parachute cords that can be hung at spaces of 4 inches vertically. And they're very, very effective. And again, he has a website. He'll tell you how to build it yourself. He'll build it for you if you feel not able to do it. I once gave a talk up in Maine, and many people were asking, what can we do? Because it's expensive to try to think about getting some of this glass replaced or so on. And I said, well, there are these bird savers with these parachute cords that are very, very cheap. And they're easily installed, and if you can generate the interest and the energy to put them up, you can save hundreds, if not thousands, of bird lives. So here's close to home. This is the Irma Education Center at Hawk Mountain, and this is Kaleidoscape. It's a film, an external film that's placed on windows. It's perforated film. The 3M company makes this film, right? They're sort of the elephant in the world when it comes to making films, and they won't sell this film themselves for bird protection, but they sell it to other people. Mr. Rank and for Kaleidoscape, which is associated with, you can get this on, you can learn about it on Amazon, I think. And anyway, his product is used at the Education Center, and you can see the top image here shows what it looks like from the outside. You can't really see the window. It makes it a matte finish, and birds are not deceived. And it's aesthetically pleasing because it gives pictures of the surrounding habitat and organisms. And then inside, you don't see the film at all. So this particular film's purpose for 3M is for advertising. It puts it on buses and other things so it lasts only a relatively short period of time, and then they take it off, have something new show up. But this very film has been on the Toronto Zoo for over 12 to 14 years, and it's held up all this time. So it's durable, and it's going to hold up and save bird lives at the sanctuary for many years to come. This is tape that's, again, following the same 2x4 or 2x2 rule. There's a company, the Convenience Group it's called, and it has a subdivision called FeatherFriendly, and they produce these films now, and now distributed. I got a note from FeatherFriendly not too long ago that in the country of Dubai, or the city of Dubai, they're using their product to make their glass protective for birds. So this is getting worldwide reach, and it's available in the United States, and it's relatively inexpensive. This is acid etch patterns that you can apply to windows where you're using the films to retrofit existing buildings. We already have products for remodeling and new construction. This is for new construction long into the future, and acid etch and frit patterns that can be used on windows are examples. This is a frit pattern at Muhlenberg College where I work, and it's a see-through corridor. At a distance, you don't even see really the dots, but when you're inside, if you stand right next to the dots, a little formidable, you sort of fight the image to see through. But if you step back, you can see right through it, and it's really not that of a problem. This is labeled as, things that probably don't work, but to some degree they do. Angling windows, right, at the base. And I did an experiment to document the effectiveness of this. And it turns out that my original hypothesis was that birds were not likely to fly into the ground, right, if it was reflected when the window was angled. But in fact, what happened is they did hit the window. And if you think about it, birds would do that because lots of birds like American robins and others fly to the ground all the time. But there was less injury and death from these angled windows at 20 and 40 degrees because the birds were deflected in terms of their momentum when they struck the glass. When I was in Austria, I was told about noise barriers, and they asked me, what do we do in the United States about noise barriers? And how do we protect the birds? And I said, well, they're opaque here. There's no need to protect them. Birds don't fly into them. But in Europe, noise barriers around railroad and highways are clear, and they slaughter birds. And so I took a train outside the city, and I found these hawk silhouettes. And this was one of the first experiments I ever did. It turns out that a hawk silhouette on a window like this is really relatively ineffective. It'll prevent the bird from striking the window where the silhouette is, but not elsewhere. And so you need to uniformly cover the window. You need to separate those hawk silhouettes or any other pattern that you're using by the 2x4 to be effective. Not so incidental. These hawk silhouettes come from the idea of a famous ethologist, animal behaviorist, Conrad Lorenz, who thought that the images of silhouettes of birds of prey were innately frightening to birds. And that was the motive for putting them on windows and scaring them away from the area. But one of his students, and a colleague, later showed that it really wasn't the image of the hawk silhouette that was innate in the animals, but rather whatever was of scarce appearance to the vulnerable animals. So they used this student in their experiments used the goose. And so the goose had a long neck and a short tail, and the hawk had the short head and the long tail. And if he made the goose the scarcer flyover to the animals he was testing, it was the item that frightened the animals, not just the shape of the hawk. The hawk, which was the more frequent flyover, was not frightening the potential prey, but the one that was the scarcer image, the goose, was frightening the prey. So it's sort of an interesting twist and the ingenuity of running experiments to try to reveal how the animals are going to respond to them. These are some decals, and again, they're sold in the open market, but don't really do the job unless you separate them by the 2 to 4 inch rule, right? Placing feeders seems counterintuitive, but the closer to the glass you place the feeder, the more protection you offer the birds, because the birds come and go, and they don't really build up enough momentum to harm themselves. This is an experiment which I conducted, and it shows the strike rates and the resulting injuries increased as you move the feeder further away from the window. My studies have also shown that a bird only needs to be perched a meter away from the window to build up enough momentum to fly into it and kill itself outright. And people have often interpreted this experiment that I published as saying, look, if it's okay, your feeders are going to be safe if you place them, more than 10 meters, more than 30 feet away from the window. And that's just not true. It turns out that if you place the feeders greater than 30 meters away so that you inhibit or you deter the animals from entering that 10 meter, that 30 feet danger zone in front of the glass surface, you've solved the problem. But as long as you have birds being attracted to the area where they have the opportunity to enter that 30 feet distance, they're vulnerable to injury or death. So the elegant solution that I've often described, and I call it elegant because birds see ultraviolet patterns and we don't. And there's a longer story here, but this is an example. You can see on the left here, this is what the window looks like in sunlight, and this is what the window looks like when you expose the ultraviolet patterns on it. Here's a picture taken with an ultraviolet camera. This is the patterning that birds we interpret see, and in sunlight where the ultraviolet signal is enhanced, and here it is in the shade. Still evident, but nonetheless not as brilliantly as it is. Okay, so that's a quick overview, right? And what I'd like to do now is just, again, for general summary, show you what I tried to do with this book. And what is this book? You know, this book is my latest attempt to try and convince a critical mass of people that this issue is important enough that we need to inform those who can do something about it. Our legislators, our zoning regulators and developers and architects. Our conservation community still needs convincing, many of them. Surprisingly, again, many people are just unaware of the magnitude and the importance of this issue. I'd like to point out, for example, in 2019, right, which I highlight in the book, a group of very distinguished scientists published in our most prestigious journal, Science, a paper in which they documented that 3 billion individual birds have been lost since 1970 to present in the North American bird population. That's 29 to 30% of all the birds in North America. And in my lifetime, I can attest, as anybody else who's lived long enough, to see how when we were young, the trees seemed to be filled with birds, and now we're searching to find and enjoy what animals we can reveal. And so it turns out that these authors point out that windows happen to be a principal attrition to these many birds that have been lost. Again, getting our media people and others aware enough so that they can write about it, they can inform others, be effective educators to stimulate this action to protect these animals is imperative. Remembering always that these birds who are victims have no voice, and they rely on us to make sure that we can protect them, even though they can't comprehend what's happening to them. So the book is written, and I highlight this in the beginning, you know, to point out for every citizen on the planet, to try to capture that critical mass of people that will influence these building professionals, these legal professionals, and anyone else who needs convincing that this is a solvable, detrimental, horrific problem that nobody wants. These deaths are totally unwanted and unintended, and we need to solve them. Since the 1970s, for 47 years, I've been formally studying this, and this graph just shows you the increase in the number of publications that have occurred. Again, there's a longer story here. Almost 10 years it took me to convince my scientific colleagues that this topic was worthy of publication, if you can believe that, right? I kept on getting my papers back as being unsuitable. I thought everything in science was suitable, but apparently not. And now I'm proud and happy to point out that a number of young scientists have been convinced that this issue is serious. They've conducted a number of studies on their own, and the literature on this topic is just growing. The other thing that I'm sort of, you know, it's not really vanity, but I'm sort of, you know, grateful for, is that, you know, in science, you make a better mousetrap, the person who made the mousetrap before is forgotten. And so far, most of the studies that have been published have reinforced my original findings and what I have subsequently investigated thereafter from my doctoral dissertation, which what this topic was from the beginning to present. So I'm still relevant, and I hope it stays that way, but I wouldn't do anything to discourage more investigation, more revealing. Species-specific interests are always important. And in the book, I tried to highlight what we can do to learn more and to ask more questions and to do more investigating. So birds hit glass. You know, glass has been around since 290 current era, and it's been killing birds, I'm sure, ever since. The very first account in North America was in 1832 in a study on the birds of North America for the first time by Nuttall, and I write about the history about where this all comes from. So again, glass is invisible. We've got clear and reflective ones that's highlighted, and we talk about the level of attrition, which I mentioned before. And then in chapter 4, I spend a great deal of time talking about the evidence. You know, what numbers do we have? What, you know, does north-facing windows on fall migration are they more of a threat to birds than south-facing windows? And in spring, is south-facing windows more a threat to birds coming north? And the answer is no. Most of these animals that are victims are nocturnal migrants, and during the day they're moving around in their habitat, feeding and resting, and they can strike a window at any orientation. Most birds are killed early in the morning, but not always. Birds, a colleague of mine in Illinois, I actually wrote that more birds die early in the morning because that's when they're attracted to feeders and they're exposed to the threat. But a colleague in Southern Illinois, the ornithologist at the Illinois Natural History Survey, had a home in Southern Illinois. And he would stop by the museum that I was working in, and he pointed out to me years later that birds were killed more often between 12 and 1 o'clock at his place. And the reason is that the birds in their community would move from backyard to backyard at different feeding stations. And the most number of birds showed up at his house between 12 and 1, and that's when most of the strikes and the attrition occurred. Again, this is a picture here of what happens when the blood-brain barrier is broken when a bird strikes a window. This is a histological section of the cerebellum of an American robin, and this is a blood pool that's, and the kinds of injuries and the kinds of symptoms that the animals would exhibit is revealed through these kinds of injuries, which we've studied x-raying hundreds and hundreds of animals to try to reveal the level of fractures and so on. I have a chapter that talks about what to do with these animals that die. We're not going to convince everybody to do something about this and to solve the problem, but for those that do pass away, we can use them to help advance our knowledge about the biology of the individual species and birds in general. For example, migration routes. I remember when I had written about how many birds were killed in Chicago for many, many years, and it took until 2005 for me to be invited and go there. And when I did, I was struck by how many brown creepers and Lincoln sparrows were killed flying into windows in the urban area of Chicago. Now, of course, we have Lincoln sparrows and brown creepers here in the East, but nothing like the amount of attrition and the numbers that I saw there. So paying attention to window kills will help us reveal migration routes. One of the things I do write in the book, for example, you may or may not know that for a long period of time, we really didn't know where the non-breeding areas of Kirtland's were, right? Our endangered species in upper Michigan. And I have window kill records in Ohio. And if you took a straight edge from their breeding grounds in Michigan and ran it through where they were killed in Ohio, it takes you right to where the breeding grounds are in the Caribbean. So some hints, right? Evidence from these animals can provide other information about natural history that can reveal them. And of course, species new to a particular geographic area, like the white-bellied embro that was killed in El Salvador, was the very first record for that country. So why do we care? The services that birds provide, I'm sure you've been informed about this, probably not an environmental study done worldwide that doesn't involve birds in some way or another. And of course, the amount of economic revenue that are generated from bird study is well known. Every 6 years or so, our government publishes an accounting of who spends what on what avocations or hobbies, and gardening always comes in first and birding always comes in second. Bird feeding alone is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so we've got a lot of forestry planning by jays and other birds that help us reclaim our habitat. All of these things are important. Geez, I have this label on top and I don't know how to get rid of it. But this particular chapter deals with the research papers and the quantitative methods and the kinds of events that have taken place over time to make this issue more visible and aware by the general community. And one of those tales that are told in this particular chapter is about Niagara Falls and the observation tower. And this is it. They were going to take this down and place it. And I was asked to help them design it so it would be safe for birds, because this is an important bird area. And the story behind this is sort of interesting. My wife and I went to
a Waterbird Society meeting on the Canadian side of Niagara Falls. And we went down and looked across the falls and saw that it looked like somebody was putting this big drape over this cliff. And we asked the tourists there, we asked the hotel, we asked our Canadian colleagues. Nobody knew. I said, what are the Americans doing over there? And then I came home, and about 2 weeks later, I get a call from the director of state parks in Albany, New York, and he wants to know if I've ever been to Niagara Falls. And I said, yeah, funny thing, I was just there. And he said, I said, what are the Americans doing over there? Well, we were going to take out the observation tower. It's been deteriorated. We were not going to replace it, but there was a public outcry. We decided to replace it. And our original design was a mirrored observation tower. And everybody told us that birds are going to be slaughtered there. And they told us about your research. And that's why I'm contacting you. And he invited me to participate in the design. And I didn't know what they did. They didn't bother to inform me. And so 2005, I happened to be going to Toronto to give a talk, and I stopped by and I saw that they had done this kind of patterning, which is effective. And I'm grateful for it. And if you didn't know, 8 to 9 million people visit Niagara Falls, and they put some signage up to try to educate people about, what the issue is and why the tower looks that way. So again, another tool to help us. The short and long-term solutions I covered before. This is the 2x4 rule. In this particular chapter, I talk about the legal protections, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and incidental take, and trying to get our government to enforce the laws that we already have to protect birds from flying into windows. And it's been a tough sell because it's a complicated issue, and court decisions have been mixed. And so the emphasis these days is to try to get municipalities to change ordinances and zoning laws to mandate that architects and developers build bird-safe buildings. So in chapter 11, I'm talking about what citizens can do, how they can advocate, how they can inform developers, how they can inform their legislatures. I give samples of an introductory letter and a sample of an ordinance that can be written for a municipality and so on. So this is, from a practical point of view, trying to, again, help out those that might have the energy and the interest to act. Okay, the last chapter, one of my technical reviewers said, Dan, you have to have something to end all this with, something uplifting. Well, the uplifting part is that, look at, this isn't climate change. It isn't really a complex issue. This is something all of us can solve tomorrow if we had the will and we work together to do it. It's just that we have to generate that will, and we have to inform the right people, and we have to incite them to make actions to protect the birds. Again, I'll repeat, birds that have no voice, birds that are being hurt. So how did I think about ending this? I thought about, well, hey, look, think about this. Here's a population of organisms. We could think about birds, but probably could be other things. And there's this insidious attrition occurring. Individuals of the population are dying. The leaders, as well as the regular citizens, are perishing. And nobody in the population has a clue. They're just accepting these losses and degradation of their society and the groups around them. And okay, along comes a visitor, perhaps an alien, right? And sees what the citizens of the population can't. And they're able to solve the problem for them. And so I write in the end, think about this invisible threat, this attrition being the windows, and think about us humans as being the aliens who can provide the answer and protect the animals. Again, they have no voice. They need us. We have to protect them. And I'm requesting you that you've taken the time to listen to me, to consider being part of that and join all of us. I'll end, because I'm thinking about it now, about a woman, Rebecca Kreshkoff, who I helped when she asked me to provide some support for her efforts to get the World Trade Center, the original World Trade Center, to stop killing birds at the windows in New York City. And she was successful. They put up netting. Now, she called me not too long ago, and she said, Dan, I'm grateful you're still on the case. I'm happy that you're still working and you're publishing and talking about this. But I got to tell you that you're probably going to be long dead before anybody really does anything serious about this problem. And so again, when I think about it, I end my talks by saying, I'm still hoping, she's wrong, and that I have a few more years left, and I am able to work with people like you and others to help solve this problem. But you can tell from just the image that you see of me that my window is closing. So let's work together. Let's solve this problem as soon as we can for those birds who can't solve it themselves. Thank you for listening. And I'd be pleased and proud, really, if I generated any questions.
Dr. Klem, thank you so much. Such an important presentation. And as you said so many times, this is a threat that is preventable. And we have a moral and ethical responsibility to do something about it. And it's so easy to just make a choice for just individual property owners or renters, whatever, just to make those choices to have a positive impact. So please, 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 audience, do that. And if I may, I did want to share a photo before we go into the questions. Dr. Klem, when you were talking about the pattern Kaleidoscape, I just wanted to share this picture. This is our beautiful Acopian Center for Conservation Science and Learning at Hawk Mountain. And just earlier this year, it's fairly new still, we installed this pattern Kaleidoscape. And it's beautiful. And from the inside of the building, as you had mentioned, Dan, you can't see anything. It's a little clear window, but then on the outside, you can really tell, and that will really keep birds safe. So thank you for letting me to share that. And let's see if we have any questions. All right. Does having a feeding station at your home increase the risk of window strikes at your home? If so, do the risks of window strikes outweigh any benefit that bird feeding may offer? Will retrofitting windows be enough to reduce risks?
Oh, for sure. Retrofitting windows will reduce risk. And I would never want to discourage people on feeding birds. I do it myself. I enjoy it so much. Unfortunately, our local, regional, like provincial and state parks and federal visitor centers are lavishly covered with glass and typically put feeders at distances that harm the animals from them flying in. And so we have to continue to get the word out to them that, like I said in my talk, move your feeders as close to the window as possible. This will help you see the birds up close and personal even better than where they are elsewhere. And at the same time, they'll protect the animals. A feeder that's more than a meter away is asking for trouble if the window is not treated. But it doesn't matter where you put your feeder if your window is treated. They're going to see it as a barrier and stay away. Thank
you. Let's see. We have some other questions. All right, we have another one coming in. Let me bring this up. Are there any model ordinances regarding bird safe glass that have been introduced at the local municipal level that you can cite as an example for those of us involved in local government to emulate?
For sure. Recently, New York City just passed an ordinance. There's one that is on the books. It may have been passed in Chicago. There are several cities, San Francisco among them, in California. The whole state of Minnesota has passed laws that require bird safe building construction. And they all have their rendition of ordinances and protection. Sadly, the Viking Stadium in Minneapolis was grandfathered, and I'm sorry to say, it's a slaughterhouse for birds. And they need to retrofit that structure. So although Minnesota might be a model in terms of statewide protection, they have a horrific problem in their capital city of Minneapolis. But I have in the book specific cities, and I have in the book some language for ordinances that would help anyone that would be serious about approaching their legislature or being part of their planning commission or anything else.
Right, thank you. Now, a little bird told me that your book is going to be available soon at the Hawk Mountain bookstore. But Dan, where are some other places where folks can purchase your book if they're interested.
Okay, so, you know, the publisher is, again, Hancock House Publishing. They're a British Columbia publisher, a small publisher, but an effective one. And as I said earlier, they're very supportive of me. And they thought it would be hypocritical if they printed a book and distributed it that wasn't using recyclable paper. So like everybody else in most industries, supply chain problems have occurred, and paper has been one of them. And they've recently received their stock, and they're now printing and distributing the book. And that's what I would recommend from them, right? And again, you can Google them, or you can www.Hancock House, or even if you remember the name, solidairebook.com. That'll get you to their site where you can order the book. And I just got one today from a European person who asked me to sign it. I saw the label, and they proudly print that this paper is done from recyclable paper. And they explained to me that they could print this paper. They could get paper for the book and print it at 1/3 the cost if they got the paper from China. But again, they want to use this recyclable paper. So that's why the price is what it's at, to try to cover some of that cost, which I think we would all agree with, right? Now, having said that, because the paper wasn't available, the recyclable paper, the publisher gave authorization to Amazon and a number of other companies to be able to distribute the book. And again, maybe your readers, your listeners know this already, right? It's a similar shock to me that people who told me they ordered the book from Amazon, the very day they ordered it, the facilities at Amazon prints the book and mails it to you that very day. So in an attempt, again, to share the information and its importance, the publisher has seen fit to let these other venues distribute the book. So you have a choice, really. I would highly recommend that you order it from the publisher directly because of this recycling issue. But if that's not available to you, or you can't help yourself and you have to get it in your hands as fast as possible, then you could use some of these other options. But thank you.
Holiday gifts. Wonderful. It's so nice to have options, and fantastic to have it printed on recycled paper. So our next question is from one of Hawk Mountain's former conservation science trainees, Brandon Brogel. Hi, Brandon. He says, excellent talk. My dad and I would like to know, what do you think is a reasonable timeline for implementing bird-safe windows in the United States?
Well, you know, like I said before, this is a problem we could solve tomorrow if we had the will. Realistically, we see, you know, certain architects that have committed themselves to making bird-safe buildings, but really it's like a drop in the ocean compared to what's available. That's why the purpose of the book is to try to, as I said earlier, capture this critical mass of people that are going to impress developers and architects that they can no longer start putting up these buildings to slaughter the animals that we care so much about without consequences. And so I want to say by the end of this year, you know, everybody is going to have an ordinance and they're going to be following it. But none of us can really make that kind of prediction. I said on another talk that I gave not too long ago, especially young people, because it was asking me, you know, what can young people do? Well, you know, join a conservation organization, take some active part, or do something creative, like make this particular topic go viral. How do you do that, right? I mean, you hear about this all the time. Something catches somebody and they're seized by the importance. And, you know, what could be more innocent than these beautiful little creatures that can't protect and care for themselves? And we're responsible for their deaths, these huge numbers of deaths. How can we live with ourselves? How can we claim to be responsible stewards of this planet? And it isn't North America. Yes, North America has a lot of papers and deaths, and the death list is growing here, but really the reach is worldwide. Maybe there are a few African huts, you know, that don't have any windows in them, but most human structures do. And it's our responsibility to make the built environment that we humans populate safe for these animals.
Be part of the solution, folks. So well said. Well, Dan, I think that's all of the questions for now. I will close by sharing some of our upcoming events at Hawk Mountain. And if more questions pop in while I'm going through our upcoming events, I'll be happy to read them.
Jamie, just before you do that, let me just thank Brandon and his father for that question. And I wasn't trying to skirt the answer. It's just that I want it to happen tomorrow. I just don't know how long it's going to take. But it's not going to ever take place unless we all work together to force, our building professionals to do something about it. Sorry. Thank you.
Great. Use your voice, advocate, spread the word, and never underestimate the impact that even one person can have.
Exactly.
Really. And Dan, thank you so much for such a vitally important presentation. I'm really looking forward to reading your book, and I hope that everyone listening gets your book on recycled paper and reads it and then gives it to someone else, pass it on to spread awareness. Thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us. Wow, we really appreciate being able to share time with you. So thank you so much. Come visit us at Hawk Mountain. Believe it or not, it is still migration. We continue our fall migration count till December 15th. This week, we've had some awesome birds flying through, some eagles and other interesting things. I think we even have a red-shouldered hawk go by today. So come visit us. Some of our upcoming programs, this Saturday, December 4th, we have a talent talk with a live raptor at 1:00 p.m. But I will say that our trails are closed due to hunting, but we do have an awesome live raptor program. On Sunday, December 12th, we have an ugly holiday sweater hike at 10:00 a.m. That's going to be a fun one, and there will be some cookies and hot cocoa. And then Wednesday, December 5th, we have homeschool happenings, winter solstice at 10:00 a.m. And that will bring us through the holiday season. So thank you everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you so much again, Dan. Bye for now.
Thank you for the gift of speaking to you.